I think we can be idealistic and maybe a bit naive and say, hey, so long as we sit down and have open conversations, we can talk through some of these things. Well, maybe you should prepare for something that might be a little worse than that. Because Charlie Kirk was the guy who said, let's just sit down and have a debate about these things. Do I need to remind you about that? He was the guy who said, yeah, of course I'll sit down and talk to somebody about immigration. Of course I'll sit down and talk to you about gay marriage. Of course I'll sit down and talk to you about feminism, whatever it is. Okay, I'm conservative. I have these set of values. I'm a Christian. I am saying some things now about white people and their majority, but I'll talk to anybody. They killed him and they celebrated his death and they want people like him dead. Okay, so the time for, let's just sit down and have a peaceful conversation, perhaps that ship has sailed.
The destruction of human freedom. But like every one of the super-states that preceded it, it has one iron rule. Logic is an enemy and truth is a menace.
So that takes us to the final part of the interview where Tucker asks Nick, where do you see America in 5 years? This is a good question. I actually posed the exact same question to Ken O'Keefe when I did the interview with him last month. Had some good answers there. You can check that out on my Substack. But here is Nick's breakdown. And I thought it was from the heart. I thought it was what needs to be said. It's easy as Christians to believe that Jesus Christ is just going to swoop in and solve the day for us. So long as we get everybody back to the faith, and this will all work itself out. We just got to stay positive. Nick said, I don't have a good feeling about America's future in the next 5 years. And this is especially true right now, given what just happened with Charlie Kirk. That's a good barometer of where America is right now, because Charlie Kirk was by no stretch of the imagination similar to Nick and what Nick's priorities are in terms of what is best for America. Charlie Kirk endorsed working class populism, colorblind meritocracy, judge people by the content of their character and not their skin color. He endorsed open tolerance for different religions and legal immigration and so on and so forth. And so when you saw Charlie Kirk get murdered on live TV by allegedly a left-wing lunatic, and then you saw, more importantly, the left base, hundreds of thousands of people going to Charlie Kirk memorials and defacing the memorials, causing a public scene, trying to interrupt the events. At the same time, you see Donald Trump and ICE and DHS trying to implement these policies to get some of the 10 million plus illegal immigrants that came into our country over the last 4 years, trying to get some of them out, a very small fractional number of them. We're talking like single-digit percentages here. It's not mass deportations by any means, but even simply going to a couple of cities and trying to use some degree of force to get these immigrants out who are here illegally. Need I remind you, you're seeing local police, local governments, and the people in those cities, Chicago, Portland, openly rebel against the authority of the federal government, against Donald Trump, against the Department of Homeland Security, against the immigration and customs enforcement agencies. And so this has become a constitutional crisis where it's no longer clear where you're living in a city that is within a county, that is within a state, that is within a nation, who has the ultimate authority to do something about an existential problem, a foreign invasion of your country, the majority soon becoming the minority, different religions that are in contradiction to the identity of America, coming here and proliferating and spreading like wildfire in your cities. If the individual cities and the leaders of them, whether it's the police department, the mayor, the governors, wherever, are not willing to do something about that problem, and even worse, it's not just that they're agnostic and they're just not intervening, they're actively stepping in and opposing and helping the illegal immigrants and helping the protesters, helping Antifa resist the correction of this. So it's simultaneously, you're seeing the left celebrate the death of a moderate conservative, Charlie Kirk. They're making T-shirts of him bleeding out of the neck, and they are going and defacing memorials to Charlie Kirk. And simultaneously, they are safe harboring immigrants, and they are attacking ICE and DHS and calling Donald Trump Hitler because he's trying to do something about the people who have invaded our country. And he's trying to hold the people accountable who legalized that invasion. We are so dramatically far apart in terms of left versus right. It's hard to see us coming back together again. And this is where all of the whispers of civil unrest and perhaps even boiling over to a civil war come from. And that's just what needs to be said. You know, I think we can be idealistic and maybe a bit naive and say, hey, so long as we sit down and have open conversations, we can talk through some of these things. Well, maybe you should prepare for something that might be a little worse than that. Because Charlie Kirk was the guy who said, let's just sit down and have a debate about these things. Do I need to remind you about that? Was Charlie Kirk going from city to city trying to arrest immigrants? Was he the one who was going from city to city saying we need to do something about these homosexuals, throw them in jail, cut off their genitalia, throw them off roofs? No, he was the guy who said, yeah, of course I'll sit down and talk to somebody about immigration. Of course I'll sit down and talk to you about gay marriage. Of course I'll sit down and talk to you about feminism, whatever it is. Okay, I'm conservative. I have these set of values. I'm a Christian. You know, I am saying some things now about white people and their majority, but I'll talk to anybody. They killed him. And they celebrated his death. And they want people like him dead. Okay, so the time for, okay, let's just sit down and have a peaceful conversation, perhaps that ship has sailed. And that's basically what Nick was saying to Tucker. The last thing that Nick said that he wants everybody to be wary of is these attempts that are praiseworthy from Donald Trump, DHS, ICE, going in and trying to do something about these immigrants. That's all good and well, and yes, it must be done. In fact, not enough of it is being done. But if you're gonna do it, you have to do it to its conclusion. You have to actually deliver the win that is a mass deportation to the tune of millions of people. For one, it's not going to make a substantial difference on the economy or the cultural fabric of the nation if it's not massive in scale. Okay? There's no actual tangible benefit if it's not massive in scale. But more important than that, if it's not massive in scale and all you do is you go into Portland and Chicago and maybe Los Angeles and a couple other places and you antagonize the left and you antagonize Antifa and all of their international funding from the likes of George Soros, but you don't actually dismantle them and you don't disarm them, this is a lot like going to your enemy's house, punching them in the face, and then saying, I hope you learned your lesson, and then leaving and thinking that things are now resolved between you and him. No, he is then going to recover, he's going to arm himself, and he is going to come swing back at you. We are political enemies. That doesn't mean we want them dead, and that doesn't mean we have any desire to physically harm them, obviously. But if you do not disarm and dismantle their means of arming themselves and their means of organization, then we are just going to be back in the same boat in 2028 when they try to put their person in power. And heaven forbid they succeed in that, then it's going to swing right back the same way. They are going to be doing everything to the far right that they did to the January Sixers. Okay? So this is the danger that we are in. If you're going to run a play, run it to completion, make sure it succeeds. Don't half-ass it. If you want mass deportations, you got to do everything possible to make sure that they are massive in scale. Otherwise, you're just kicking the hornet's nest. That's the message that Nick has had on his show well before he went on Tucker, and that's what he wrapped up the interview with last night.
Meeting the people that you actually want to meet this day and age is basically impossible. Well, I have a solution to these problems. You're wearing your anti-Zog merchandise, that cutie from across the gym. She knows what the Zog is. She knows that Save Europa is code for white genocide. Or if it's somebody of the same gender, boom, you just got yourself a new best friend. This is your opportunity. Everybody's always complaining about how hard it is to find people who know what's really going on. Well, this is it. This is how you broadcast those beliefs to the world.
So that is it, you guys. That is my very, very thorough, 2.5 hour breakdown of the interview between Nick and Tucker. Seriously, a generational moment. Where things go from here is anybody's guess, but there has been obviously a trend of rehabilitation for Nick This is something that Nick has organized, and through the grace and benevolence of a number of different people, special shout outs to Alex Jones in particular for platforming Nick over years. You got guys like Fresh and Fit, you had Pearl Davis, you had Sneeko. Recently, you saw him on Bradley Martin, who is in no way political. He's just a guy who has good outreach to the youth. He even went on the Nelk Boys. He collaborated with Dave Smith. He's collaborated with Glenn Greenwald. Obviously, even somebody like Candace Owens, where even if that was a hit job, it still went very far in getting Nick to the mainstream. And now this is the breakthrough moment. There is no further mainstream than Tucker Carlson. Well, I take that back. If you suddenly saw Nick Fuentes invited to be on CNN and Fox News, okay, that's a whole different category. But assuming he was invited, so long as he stands for the same things, we'd be just fine with that. Of course, those invitations are never coming because CNN and Fox News, MSNBC, ABC, Daily Wire, those institutions exist to serve a certain narrative, and hearing counterpoints to their narrative that are successful and articulate, morally unimpeachable, that's not tolerated. Those people are obviously not invited, and it's for a reason. But independent actors like those that I mentioned, podcasters, I think there's a good chance you probably even see him on Joe Rogan. So I'm very, very pleased with the interview. In summary, to wrap up on our grading criteria, to kind of finish where we began, the things I said I wanted to see from this interview, I'll remind you, were both of them talking about how they were accusing each other of being feds. I wanted to hear a bit more about the evidence they had for their claims, or at least the reasons for those. I thought that was a pretty good conversation. I think Nick should have went harder on Tucker's side because, hey, Tucker was the one who said he had proof that Nick was a fed. Nick has never made that allegation. Nick has said, here's my circumstantial reasons for thinking that Tucker is a fed. Tucker said he had proof. Never provided it. Nick didn't demand that proof. I think that was a missed opportunity. The second one here was a complete miss, okay? I said that I wanted to see Nick press Tucker on his staunch promotion of J.D. Vance for vice president, working directly with Donald Trump and influencing that decision. That was a complete miss. And J.D. Vance was brought up briefly during the interview, and I don't know how dangerous it would have been for Nick to go there, but that's something critical to the success of America First. Honestly, the simple protection of America as a nation. We cannot have this country run by J.D. Vance. He is not America First. Perhaps in future interviews, Nick can go there. But, look, in my opinion, Tucker is personal friends with Joe Kent, and he allowed Nick to go hard on why he opposed Joe Kent. Okay? So I think if you're personal friends with J.D. Vance, also, by the way, he got money from J.D. Vance's, I can't remember the name of his organization, but to start Tucker Carlson Network, he did get money from J.D. Vance, and obviously he's a personal friend and recommended J.D. Vance for vice president to Donald Trump. But hey, Tucker has proven to be more pro-free speech than we all thought, simply by having Nick on and allowing him to say anything. That was a day that none of us thought was going to come, and we were proven wrong, and Nick was proven wrong. So I'll happily say that I was wrong. I would have said last year, even earlier this year, there's no way Tucker will ever allow him on. He's a gatekeeper, blah, blah, blah. I've said it plenty of times before. We were all wrong. And this is a great, great time to be alive, to be wrong on this particular subject. And so that is a big miss, though. So as I said, I think Nick really should have pressed him on the J.D. Vance subject, Peter Thiel, the PayPal Mafia, Palantir, Alex Karp, blah, blah, blah. I think Nick could have gone harder on Tucker genuinely not clocking the Jewish problem, Jewish influence, seeing that it's a problem beyond the nation of Israel, because that would have determined whether or not Tucker is simply trying to stay relevant by saying, okay, now I'll criticize Israel too. Maybe there are some Jewish individuals, but that's not true about all Jews. Or if he's simply acting as a pressure release valve right now, or potentially even still a gatekeeper, because as we saw throughout this interview, constantly, every time Israel or the Jews came up, Tucker was quick to fall back on the boomerism of, but it's not all Jews, and it's actually anti-Christian to say anything about, quote, the Jews, and identity politics is bad. So I think Nick came out the clear victor every time that subject came up. I did mention that I wish Nick would have went a bit harder on just theoretically talking about group behavior, and that we shouldn't pause on that. We shouldn't have to add asterisks and apologize for referring to groups, stereotypes, patterns, and so on. It's biblically sound. As I said, the government, political parties study group behavior all the time. So does the entire economy. They did hit on the hit job that Tucker helped facilitate through Max Blumenthal and the Gray Zone article. So I was happy to see that. I think, maybe Nick I think Nick could have gone harder on everything, but we have to be happy with what we got. And then I think Nick, I'm saying this over and over again, but he could have went harder on Tucker in regards to the white identity of America. His historic statements about it being a colorblind meritocracy, working class populism. He said, okay, I disagree with Joe Kent because Joe Kent was saying those things. This is what Nick was saying. But Tucker, I disagree with you too. I don't think America comes down to the political interest of it being a working class populism, protecting capitalism, protecting the free market. Actually, there is an identity here, and that identity is as a white European nation, and that must be protected. It's more important that we protect white European culture than it is that we protect capitalism or the ability for anybody of any nation, of any religion to come here. It's more important that we protect our own people than anything, and our faith, obviously. So amongst my grading criteria, was I fully satisfied with the interview? No. It is a very stringent criteria, but realistically speaking, in 2 hours with such a large audience, with Nick having a strategic mission that is not to go and shock the audiences, but it is to introduce himself, introduce our priorities in a way that is relatable and fully articulate, morally unimpeachable. Nick did succeed in doing that. That's obviously the most important thing. And perhaps this sets him up for future conversations where we can go a bit harder on these subjects of white identity, the larger Jewish issue that is not limited to the foreign nation of Israel. So hopefully this is the beginning of an open discussion between the two of them and mutual respect for each other. All right, guys, that's going to wrap it up. I hope you enjoyed my coverage of this interview. I actually did the same thing when he had his big interview with Candace Owens. I did the same thing when he had his interview with Arvel of Return to the Land. I like doing these breakdowns where I say, here's what I want to hear, here's what we did here. And each of these moments are increments along the timeline of America First ascension into the mainstream. And we have ascended further than I think any of us thought was possible in this short period of time. So I'm a very, very happy individual tonight. Even with my grievances, I think this was a huge success for Nick and for America First, for Groypers worldwide. So until next time, you guys, if you appreciated my content and my review of this interview, you can help Beholden To Truth out as a platform. You can go and get yourself some merch from beholdentotruth.com, the anti-Zog occupation apparel line. There's also a Save Europa apparel line. I have a Substack as well, beholdentotruth.substack.com. That is where you can get access to this full, uncut, unedited interview, as well as access to exclusive documentaries, early access to my weekly vlogs that come out. You can even set up a one-on-one, ask me anything if you'd like. So those are the ways you can support my work, through the merch store or through my Substack. And obviously following, leaving comments, and liking the content. That's great for the algorithm. Follow me on Instagram. We got 110,000 followers over there. On YouTube, we're slowly accumulating our following. We're at about 5,000. We need that to be exponentially more than it currently is. As your loyal servant in America First, to all my other fellow Groypers, I am celebrating tonight. We have achieved a tremendous victory with this rehabilitation and embracing of Nick in the mainstream. We aren't quite there yet in terms of where we need to be, but very positive signals. So until next time, you guys, I love you. Take care of yourselves. America First, and Christ is King.
The few brave men who have actually tried to go out and do something about white genocide or talk about Jewish influence, the Zionist-occupied government, we all know that they get crucified, their careers get destroyed, and so we need to find ways to support each other. One of the ways that I have done that is by creating my Substack, where there are exclusive early access to documentaries, my weekly vlogs, there are ebooks there. There's even an opportunity to set up a one-on-one 30-minute Ask Me Anything if you'd like. All of the proceeds from my Substack, from my YouTube channel, from the merch gets reinvested in the platform. I use that to pay my employees. I use that to buy the equipment that I need, the cameras, the lights, the MacBook, all the books, all of the software, pay for marketing, everything else, but also it protects my literal life. So if you want to help out, please do head on to Substack, get yourself a subscription. Thank you. I appreciate it. America first and Christ is King.